Hundreds of protesters gathered in the Iraqi capital Baghdad on Saturday to demand U.S. troops leave the country in accordance with the parliament vote earlier this year. "Get out before the missiles of the faithful ones push you out," read one of the banners at the demonstration, which took place near an entrance to the high security green zone where the U.S. Embassy and other foreign missions are located. Others carried signs bearing the logo of the Popular Mobilization Units, better known as al-Shaabi, the local Iraqi anti-terrorism forces, the only viable force against Daesh in the country. These protests came days after Iraq's anti-terror Kataib Hezbollah group, a faction of the country's al-Shaabi, had warned that a tougher and stronger confrontation awaits U.S. forces should they defy a timetable set for their withdrawal from the Arab country. Kataib spokesman Mohammed Mohyi had stressed last week that the conditional ceasefire with foreign soldiers in Iraq should be taken seriously, as the limits and conditions set by the resistance will be followed by confrontation. The Kataib spokesman further urged the Iraqi government to preserve the country's sovereignty and control its land and sky. Otherwise, it will be accused of collaborating and colluding with the Americans. Iraq's Harakat al-Nujaba resistance group, another faction of al-Shaabi, also warned of a malicious American plot to disintegrate the country through a soft war combined with political and religious sedition. Nujaba Secretary General Sheikh Akram al-Kaabi declared then that the United States had assassinated top Iranian anti-terror commander Lieutenant General Qasem Soleimani and the Popular Mobilization Force's second-in-command Abu Mahdi al-Muhandis in a bid to change the political security equation in Iraq. But the scheme was foiled by the nation's vigilance, and coming up next will be either withdrawal or direct confrontations. Welcome to the Mideastream. I'm Marwa Osman. Iraq's anti-terror Kataib Hezbollah group, a faction of the country's Popular Mobilization Units, better known as al-Shaabi, has warned that a tougher and stronger confrontation awaits U.S. forces should they defy a timetable set for their withdrawal from the Arab country. The Iraqi resistance further warned that the next stage of the fight will soon take place, featuring new types of weapons. To discuss this issue with us from Malmo is Mr. Firas Ali, political commentator. Thank you very much for being with us. Firas, now, Iraq's Kataib Hezbollah warned U.S. occupation soldiers in Iraq about taking any hostile measures against the Iraqi people or the Iraqi resistance groups for that matter, vowing to maybe escalate the fight if necessary with, quote, new and improved weaponry. Now, this is a very important message. However, is this message for the current new U.S. administration in the United States of America, or is this rather a strict message to the current government led by Qademi in Iraq, because they're absolutely putting them in the front line between them and the Americans? So to whom is this message sent to?
I think this message is probably directed to both the Iraqi government and the Trump administration. Regarding the message to the Trump administration, it's probably in case of this bad loser president has thoughts about any military adventures in Iraq now when he has lost the elections. And regarding the message to the Iraqi government, it's the resistance here telling the government that it won't accept any attacks like those who happened last year against the PMF bases in Iraq, and that it's necessary for the government to speed up the withdrawal of the US forces from Iraq. An interesting point here, Marwa, as you pointed out, it's the message about improved weaponry. It's a message from the resistance to the US forces that the resistance and the PMF has not been idle during this year waiting for the withdrawal of the US forces. They have improved their weaponry and they will use them in case they need it.
Well, Firas, the Kataib spokesman, he urged the Iraqi government last week to preserve the country's sovereignty and control also the land and sky of Iraq. Otherwise, it will be accused of collaborating and colluding with the American occupation soldiers inside of Iraq. Now, this means it's a serious threat in Iraq, in a country that is already volatile. It has a lot of divisions within it, politically, security-wise, even sectarian-wise. Are we looking ahead towards a possible civil war maybe in Iraq if the government keeps up its stance against the resistance in favor of the US occupation?
I don't think so, Marwa, because any enforced action against the PMF from the government is also an action against the Iraqi security apparatus. It's not possible. One of the reasons is that the second biggest paramilitary alliance in Iraq, the Fatah Alliance, is basically a protector of the PMF. And some of the resistance groups have their political wing in the Fatah Alliance. And also, we have to see that in the message of the spokesman, he's really telling, as we mentioned earlier, the Iraqi government that we won't have a summer like 2019. Mm-hmm. The Iraqi government can't excuse itself by delaying the withdrawal from of the U.S. forces in Iraq. It's a responsibility to control the air and lands, and if that doesn't happen, the resistance won't be bound by any political solution for the withdrawal. They will have the free fire against the U.S. forces in case of any attacks.
Well, what's interesting, though, Firas, is that at the beginning of the year when Kadhimi, or months ago when Kadhimi took office, he was presented by a uniform for the Popular Mobilization Units, and he was lauded by the Popular Mobilization factions. But now it seems that the level of threats and the level of concern is rising among both the factions and the government. Is there a specific maybe breaking point that might happen that would put both sides in a confrontation?
It could be like that, because when the parliament gave confidence to the Kadhimi administration, the Fatah Alliance also voted for it. They gave him a chance, because nobody in Iraq wants a country without a government. It won't function, especially in this time with the problem of the U.S. forces, the pandemic, and so on. But since then, Kadhimi has slowly but very standby, he has come closer to the U.S. position regarding the PMF. We have the attack on the Kataib Hezbollah, the raid on the Kataib Hezbollah base in Baghdad, which I think the Kataib Hezbollah handled very good, because they showed a form of strategic patience and didn't fall into the trap of strife between the army and the resistance.
This is very interesting, though, that the Americans may not have assessed the capabilities of the Iraqi resistance groups, since they did not engage in battle yet against them. But they did have targeted the PMU military bases, whether inside of Iraq or on the border with Syria, and they made sure that the Iraqi government harassed especially Kataib Hezbollah factions within the Popular Mobilization Forces. When we saw them arresting Kataib Hezbollah members a couple of months back as well. What if the US just maintains this kind of rhetoric? Where can you see Iraq then?
Well, firstly, I don't think the Americans will be able to harm the PMF or the resistance only by harsh rhetoric, because the resistance is not made of glass. Secondly, the U.S. forces has a disadvantage in Iraq. Like in any form of sports, they are the away team. This is local ground. This is home ground for the resistance. It's the resistance people, and it has legitimate demands which the people support. So the resistance will be in the upper hand here in face of any confrontation between them and the U.S. forces. You know, Marwa, recently some reports have been circulated in media about the U.S. intentions to target the resistance leaders, Khazali and someone else, Hadi al-Amri it was, I think. I think that is also part of the U.S. propaganda machine to scare the resistance movement, but they're trying to scare people who doesn't have fear in their vocabulary. I think the Iraqi resistance are fully aware of the U.S. intentions, and thus it won't fall into this trap that the U.S. are trying to get them into.
Last month, we had members of the Iraqi Resistance Coordination Commission publishing a statement suggesting that they would halt their military operations against the U.S. occupation troops in Iraq, including rocket attacks, providing that Washington does not persist in maintaining illegal presence in the Arab country. What if U.S. troops move to Kurdistan and maybe maintain their warmongering behavior against the Popular Mobilization Forces from Kurdistan, Iraq? What options do you think that the PMU have?
Well, firstly, Iraqi Kurdistan is still part of Iraq as a country, and any withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq, it would also include Iraqi Kurdistan. Secondly, according to the Iraqi constitution, Article 110, it is the federal government in Baghdad who are responsible for the security of Iraq. It includes the borders, the lands, and all that goes within the national security policy of the country. So withdrawal from Iraq would also mean withdrawal from the northern region of Iraq. But in case of that doesn't happen and the US forces move their bases to the northern part of the country, well, the federal government in Iraq has several options in handling this issue. One of them is the budget issue, because a lot of the money for the local budget in northern Iraq comes from Baghdad. And there are probably other alternatives as well for the government. And regardless of how the government will react, the US would be very foolish if they think that they are safer up there if they take any actions against the PMF or the resistance in Iraq, because certainly the bases in northern Iraq are within the fire range of the resistance forces, especially if the surprises here, which the spokesmen are hinting to, the improved weaponry will be get to use in that matter.
Well, I want to thank you very much, Firas Ali, political commentator, for joining us from Malmo to talk about the possible confrontation that might happen between the Iraqi resistance and the US if the US does not leave Iraq and withdraw its troops. I want to thank you for your contribution. Now, please stay tuned with us. We will talk more about Palestine in the next segment. Israeli bulldozers and diggers demolished Palestinian village of Khirbet Humsa last week, leaving 74 people, including 41 minors, homeless. An advocacy group says that more than 800 Palestinians have been left homeless by Israeli demolitions so far this year, after this single target by Israeli demolition displaced dozens in the occupied West Bank. Israel ethnically cleansing the West Bank in this following report. Ethnic cleansing is what the Israeli regime continues to do against the native Palestinians in the occupied territories. The demolition operation, which displaced dozens of Palestinian citizens in the occupied West Bank last week, was conducted under the Israeli annexation and settlement expansion schemes. Late on Tuesday, November 3rd, as the world was busy with the US elections 2020, the Israeli regime's bulldozers, heavily guarded by soldiers, razed to the ground a Bedouin village in the district of Tubas in the Jordan Valley, leaving dozens of inhabitants of the village homeless, half of whom were children. The bulldozers proceeded to demolish 70 civilian properties, including storerooms and residential tents that sheltered 11 families composed of 60 people, including 41 children. According to a report by the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, the tented homes, animal shelters, latrines, and solar panels were among the structures that had been razed in the area. The demolitions were preceded by the confiscation of several Palestinian vehicles and other possessions. The Israeli occupation soldiers also raided Palestinian homes in the area and confiscated money and precious items from local residents. Now tell me, how is this not piracy and war crimes? Tell me, how can the Palestinians stop these illegal colonial pirates when every time this happens they turn to the international community and UN bodies to uphold their legal and moral duties in order to urgently intervene to curb Israel's ongoing crimes against the Palestinian population? This large-scale demolition confirms once again that nothing will stop Israel from maintaining its trend of confiscations and demolitions. Well, nothing except the ultimate act of revolt, a new blood of resistance that would initiate a full-fledged intifada. A new spirit of revolution like that of hero Maher al-Akhras, who fought for his freedom through an empty stomach, leading to a victory after 103 days of hunger strike. Maher's steadfastness and commitment to struggle with his very life on the line continue to inspire all those around the world who support the Palestinian people and their cause of return and liberation and their current fight against ethnic cleansing. Now with us from Ramallah to discuss this issue is Dr. Nimr Saad, academic and political commentator. Thank you for being with us, Dr. Saad. Now, Dr. Saad, a total of 74 people were displaced, more than half of which were minors, as Israeli bulldozers and diggers demolished houses, sheds used as livestock enclosures, portable toilets, water containers, and solar panels, on top of confiscating vehicles and tractors belonging to the Palestinian residents who are now homeless in the occupied West Bank. What is the Palestinian Authority waiting for to take firm action against Israel?
Well, we know that the Israelis are trying to evacuate the Jordan Valley from its 46 communities, Bedouin communities like Homsa, which had happened just a few days ago. But before that, it was also Fasail and other areas which is subjected to the Israeli measures of evacuation. This is a kind of an ethnic cleansing in the area. Now, for the Palestinian Authority, they are trying to do something about it, but remember that this area is sea area, which is under, according to Oslo Agreement, under the Israeli jurisdiction. It means that the Palestinian Authority officially can't do anything. So it was led to some of the, let me say, organizations and popular committees who are trying to stand with Homsa and the area in general. Now they are providing them with all the equipments they needed, new tents, and try to rebuild the whole area again. But still, this is not enough. Anyway, the Palestinian Authority also is trying to contact the international community in so many ways through the United Nations and through the embassies in order to put this issue in front of the international community to take measures, and especially that Belgium, for instance, was the first one to protest, and they are demanding Israel to pay them, the Belgium, compensation, because the Belgium have helped this area of Homsa. However, what we are thinking now that not only the Palestinian Authority, but I think also there should be a kind of popular resistance and popular movement in the area to support the area, exactly the same like what happened in Khan al-Ahmar when the Palestinians stayed there all day and night for a long period to prevent the demolition of that village also.
Well, Dr. Saad, by all means, what Israel is doing is falling under the aspect of ethnic cleansing again. And this is a crime punishable by international law, yet the international community, especially the UN, seems to be completely out of the picture. Why is that?
They were always out of the picture. The problem is not that they don't know what the Israelis are doing, and let alone the United Nations. What about the European Union, for instance, who had a special treaty with Israel? According to the European Union articles, they said that we deal with the countries in accordance to their human rights violation and human rights record. And they know exactly that the Israelis are violating not only the human rights, but all kinds of laws, international laws in this respect. But they don't do anything at all, because by the end of the day, they have some special relationship with America, and they are more interested in these relationships and the economic relationships with America more than the human rights in Palestine, more than the international law in Palestine. So neither the United Nations nor the European Union will do anything apart from just condemnation or trying to tell the Israeli in a way or another that you shouldn't do that. But I don't think that they are going to take any measure which will be effective. In this coming week or 2 weeks from now, on the memory of the Palestinian solidarity with the Palestinian people on the 29th of November, there will be some sessions in the United Nations, and these things are going to be addressed. But unfortunately, as I said, even if they have taken resolutions in the General Assembly or even in the other circles in the United Nations, the Israelis are not going to comply. By the end of the day, the Israelis are backed by the Americans, and the Americans supporting them. They will prevent any resolution by the Security Council with the veto, and they will help Israel. And we have so many resolutions in the United Nations on the level of the General Assembly, but the Israeli not complying with these resolutions. We need more, if you like, pressure on Israel and on America and on the international community.
This brings us to a very important question here, because as you said, the wiping of a whole community at once is extremely rare in the world, except in Palestine. And it seems that Israel is making use of the fact that everyone's attention is elsewhere. It's on the US results, the US elections 2020 results. But the attention of the Palestinians is there, exactly inside Palestine. How do you think the Palestinian political and resistance factions will respond to such an ethnic cleansing, especially since the UN bodies are in a different place right now?
Well, now the Palestinians are trying to do this reconciliation and to put one strategy. I believe personally, and most of the Palestinians do believe, that we need to go into our own resistance, to ourselves, to start a real resistance, not only a peaceful, as they put it, always peaceful and popular, but also all kind of resistance should be allowed to the Palestinians. We are in such a position that not only the United Nations, but the whole world community failed us. They see the violations, they see the ethnic cleansing, which is continuing since 1948 till today, and in so many different ways, but it's still there, not only in the West Bank, but also in Jerusalem, also in Golan Heights. We have to understand, and the international community have to understand, that Israel is a state of violence and also racist against everyone, and they are not going, to have at any time any relationship with the Palestinian in terms of a real peace. They wanted the whole land and they want the Palestinian out. So if we come to that idea or understand this idea, then we have to change our strategies that still thinking that we might have negotiations, peace negotiations with Israel, and now after the elections in America, maybe there will be some movement towards these negotiations. This is absolutely stupidity, if you like. We should know that what are the intentions of Israel. They are not going to take off the settlements. They are not going to stop the ethnic cleansing. They are not going to seize their measurements to ethnic cleansing and to take our land. So we need to change our strategy to a fighting strategy, to a real resistance in all levels. And to remember that in 1982, the United Nations resolution allowed the Palestinian, exactly the resolution says that the Palestinians have the right to resist the occupation in any way they find it appropriate. And I think now it's appropriate to use all kind of resistance against this country, which I can't call it even a country, this bunch of gangsters who are trying to do whatever they like and nobody can stop them.
I want to thank you very much, Dr. Nimr Saad from Ramallah, for giving us the clearest picture about what's going on in the occupied territories of Palestine. Thank you very much. Our solidarity with you and all the Palestinian people for their resistance towards their liberation and their return to their rightful home in Palestine. Thank you for your contribution. Now, please stay tuned next week for more from the Mideastream.